Center for Climate Change. My name is Yunus Arikan. I'm the Director of Global Advocacy at ICLEI-Local Governments for Sustainability, and I'm also the focal point of Local Governments and Municipal Authorities Constituency to the UNFCCC. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to moderate this session on behalf of ICLEI. Today, in this 75 minutes, we will be having 5 speakers. In terms of our format, we will follow a first round of comments from our speakers, then to the audience at the virtual platform of the COP26, we will invite, if there are any questions, we would like to answer them, and then we'll continue with the second round of questions. We don't have translation in this service, in this session, so the session will be all in English. Above all, we would like to thank first of all, UNFCCC Secretariat in choosing our application for the side event, offering this brilliant, unique atmosphere and the technical opportunity, because for all of us, I think we are feeling a bit like in a space station. We are used to talking to the audience live, and we also used to talk to audience virtually over the past 2 years. But for the first time now, we are talking to the screens, and we have Secretariat and technical colleagues helping us. So I think it will be a unique experience for all of us, and I would like to invite all of you for your patience if there's anything we are not able to follow up. So I am in this session joined by, let me just introduce first of all who we are joining this. Ronan Dantec is a senator of Nantes from France, and he's representing Council of Europe, European Municipalities and Regions, CEMR. We have Sergio Graf, Secretary of Environment and Territorial Development from State of Environment of Jalisco, from Mexico, and he's also the Regions 4 Vice President for Americas. Kelly King, Councilor from Maui County, Hawaii in the US, and she's also the board member of ICLEI US. We have Maria Jose Sanz, Director of Basque Center for Climate Change, and Jean-Baptiste, representing United Cities and Local Governments. Before we start the discussion, I'd like to share with you some updates with our constituency in terms of a couple of slides we have here, just both taking us through the past and today. We are in the 26th Climate Conference. Local governments and municipal authorities have been participating in this process as a partner into the UNFCCC system. Obviously, we are not the decision makers, but the contributions in terms of the decision makers are important. We're trying to make sure implementation is done, but also the decisions that will be adopted is also responding to the needs of the local and regional governments. Over these years now, we have reached to around more than 30 networks of local and regional governments. Since 1995, we are running this process. We are the official channel to the negotiation process through submissions. We have a chronology, success story, especially over the years from Copenhagen until today. I will not go through all of this, but let's make sure that the reason why we are here today is that the Paris Agreement really acknowledged our engagement as an important actor, and now it's time to deliver this vision that multi-level collaboration is our work. We are all aware that over the past 2 years we are in a unique hybrid advocacy, so we are trying to participate both the presidency's initiatives, the champions' work, but as a constituency, we also keep our direct autonomous submissions to the process. On the 31st of October, when the first day of the COP started here in Glasgow, we had our first press conference, and that was the moment where we announced our Glasgow Time4MultilevelAction roadmap, which constitutes 4 main blocks. This was first to make sure multi-level action is the new normal in the second phase of Paris Agreement, to make sure climate finance, especially from national, global and private sector, comes to the localization, to the local and regional institutions. Just climate is our new essential element. It is not just mitigation adaptation from culture to food, from biodiversity to gender. We have to respond all realities. And as a constituency, we are much better organized, because once we are more engaged in the process, there is a more demand for us to be more actively involved in the process. What we have seen over these 2 years, compared to Paris Agreement, more countries have improved their capacities and they have engaged with local and regional governments. That's the only beacon of hope. We are seeing that from US to Rwanda, from Japan to Dominican Republic. There are more than 60 countries who have made their ambitions more, who have made their commitments more ambitious because they work with local and regional governments, and that's what we want every nation to be inspired with. We are in Glasgow in 2 weeks, both in the Blue Zone and the Green Zone. We will be hosting a number of events. In the Blue Zone, we are having a multi-level action pavilion hosted by Scottish government, and a diversity of broad diversity of partners are participating there. We are following the agendas of the UNFCCC presidency, but also introducing the unique priorities of our constituencies, cities and regions. The pavilion is now fully virtual, and we will be continuing to do interventions as well. So with this, let's say, setting the scene, I suggest we start with our first partner, Regions 4. Sergio, you have been representing Regions 4 both in Americas but also globally. Today it was a particularly important day for you. Regions 4 announced your new reports and new commitments. How the regional governments network have been contributing, especially in this era of multi-level collaboration. Let's hear from you first.
Yes, well, thank you. And good evening, everyone, and good morning in other places. And it's a pleasure for me to share this panel with my colleagues up here, and of course with the audience. You know, well, it's more and more important the role of subnational governments to achieve the goals to the challenge that we have in climate change in the world. But in the other side, not only the regional and state government is very important to have a capacity and agenda. We have to develop in other levels, in municipal levels, in regional levels, in micro-regional levels, in our regions or states, a capacity. In this way, the government of Jalisco started a decentralized environmental policy since the last decade through a novel figure in Mexico known as the Intermunicipal Board of Environment and Territorial Development. That could be very common for Spain and France with the Syndicat Intercomunal or las mancomunidades in Spain, but in Mexico, Jalisco was the first state that developed this model, which is intermunicipal boards, which have a technical office for canalize the state resources to solve local problems defined by the mayors of the board and the Secretary of Environment of Jalisco and other state, federal authorities, and representatives from the academic and NGOs. That permit us, with these technical offices or agencies, have allowed us to consolidate capacity for the service of local governance, converting virtually all the state territory and facilitating the relationship between the state government and municipality, and develop a capacity to an action and climate action plan locally. Currently, we have 11 intermunicipalities, boards of environment, organized by the watershed format, approach that permit a good collaboration in aspects like in adaptation, like water management or forest management. And we have 5 intermunicipal agencies for solid waste management. But in metropolitan area, we have another, a similar model to manage the city, and is an agency for Metropolitan Agency for Guadalajara Cities, named IMEPLAN. Nevertheless, excluding the Metropolitan Agency that have more capacity and that is determined by a specific law, and they have more capacity because we have Guadalajara City have 5 million people living in the city, and there's the most capacities, institutional capacity in these municipalities, and the intermunicipal mechanism in the rural area has a weak spot, and that was the non-existent and specific legal fundamentation applied to them. And in order to fill this void, we work with the State Parliament in a new law initiative for intermunicipal association that I'm really proud to share with you that after many efforts, it was finally approved by the Congress a few days ago. That could be very normal for some countries, but in Mexico, that's not really common. And that permits us, with this law, the state government now has the responsibility to support and strengthen the intermunicipal agency, and this is a really huge progress in the centralization of public policies in environment and climate change policies in all the territory of the state. And that I want to remark is not only the state or regional government that have more capacity to develop this agenda, but we have to develop that until municipal organization.
I think you rightly have pointed out this issue that it's not the mega cities, as you said, especially in the new coming decades, a majority of the urbanization will be in the smaller or intermediate sized cities. Yeah. Therefore, the institutional and the role of the regional governments will be to supporting them and strengthening them will be important. I think that's a very important point you raised. Thanks a lot. Maybe you can, in the second round, focus on also Jalisco's commitments for Race to Zero and Race to Resilience, which also is important now that is part of the thousands now cities in the world, and then that's why we are celebrating this contribution. We were in Latin America, now let's come to Europe. Ronan Dantec, you have been a mayor and the senator for a long time, and you have been following the negotiations since Copenhagen, and of course Europe is one of the first continents to commit for climate neutrality, and there is a new concept of local Green Deals and how this relates to European Green Deals. So maybe we can think of, you can share your insight on this perspectives.
Thank you, Yunus. Maybe a concrete result to start with, we know with the data of the Joint Research Center in Europe that between 2025 and 2017, a large part of the decreasing of CO2 emissions in Europe are in the territories who are members of the Covenant of Mayors, the big initiative to mobilize city, region in Europe. 28%. The member of the Covenant, city, region, it's around 15% of inhabitants in Europe, and the result is 28%. 28. It's incredible. It's clear.
So 50% of the population, but 28% of the reductions.
Yes, yes. It's very important to underline this result. This result shows if we have not the mobilization of the cities, of the territories, it's impossible for Europe to reach the targets. As you know, we have very ambitious targets for 2030 in Europe. 55% less, it's a lot. It's impossible in Europe to reach this target if we have not the mobilization of all the local governments, the subnational government. It is key, and our role at this moment is to see how we create this mobilization, how Europe and national government support the effort of the local and subnational government, how we have a coherence between all the level of governance. It's a very important point, and with my NGO Climate Change, and we work of course with ICLEI, we try to analyze this point, but we need more consistency between local, regional, national, and European framework. It's key to deep this point at this moment. We progress, it's clear, but we see, for example, with the new Green Deal, a lot of money, that it's not very clear how the money pass between Europe, the state, and the local government. It's not so clear at this moment, and a part of the discussion between the networks of local government in Europe and the Commission and the different national countries is to see how it's possible to cap for the local government this money, because it is clear that it is the local government who see clearly where this money will be the most efficient. We have no money to do all. We must do choice. A politician do choice every time. And it's clear that it's locally that we need clearly what this money will be more efficient. And we must continue to discuss with country, with the European Union, to this strategy. But I think the new thing with this kind of result, it's that now it's possible for us to demonstrate clearly it's not just we feel that we do good job. No, we have the result. We have done the job. We have to continue the job. And we are in this moment, and it is an interesting moment. The second point, it is that, of course, it's important to decrease CO2 emission. Mitigation is very important. But now we have on the table the question of adaptation. And the question of adaptation, it's clearly different, because if we see the cities who have the better result in Europe, as my city Nantes, for example, it is a lot of these cities are rich city in Europe, capital, metropole, a lot of money, a lot of capacity of engineering. We have the capacity to do. For adaptation, it's very different. It's the south of Europe who have the big problem, and not the money. And we need more solidarity. Maybe we have to create new tools to create more cooperation between the territories, between the country, for this question of adaptation. This question was not our agenda in the first time. Yunus, you know that when we negotiate in Cancun, our first mention about the role of local government, we have to do the job together. Our focus was mitigation. Now it's important to create a balance with adaptation, and it's not the same territories who need the money of adaptation, and we have the capacity to decrease CO2 emissions. We are in this moment, and this moment it's more, I think, a moment ending with a sustainable development goal, with SDG, and we must create a complete strategy between climate and SDG.
And also in the case of adaptation, for example, as we have seen this summer, the floods. I mean, I live in Germany, and the immediate, let's say, experience that was not been seen on the past 250 years, and the capacity of the cities was clearly not enough. And without the state and without the federal government support, obviously these problems wouldn't be able to be sorted out. And that's another reason why multi-level is essential. Adaptation needs are local, but the financial resources that has to be mobilized for adaptation is beyond municipal capacity.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's one of the reasons why we have to raise this issue.
And we have to exchange about best practices. For example, a solution based on nature for flood, it's clear. For fire, we need to have an European task force for big fire. We need to create this tool and to discuss together with country in the next months, next year.
So let's go back to Americas, but this time a bit northern part of it. So we have Kelly King from an island community, representing of an island community, but from the United States. So United States, of course, has been followed by many because of their in and out, in the sense that federal government's position. But throughout this period, local and state governments have always been on the front runner, be it in the Kyoto Protocol era or in the Paris Agreement. But now we have a new, let's say, dynamic, new situation in the US, where you have a federal government which is supportive. And if we look at the NDC submitted by the US federal government in April 22nd, which was one of the best practices in terms of how the data, information, and capacity from local and state governments and even tribal communities have been reflected to the national level. So in that sense, that was one of the remarkable experiences. So maybe we can listen from you, Ms. Councillor King. So how now from a local perspective? So we have seen state government, we have seen metropolitan governments. You are, of course, both a council, but also relatively remote from the let's say, land, but in an island community. Obviously, you have unique challenges, but you still participate in the national discussions in your capacity, also board member of US in ICLEI. So how do you see this multi-level perspective in the United States now evolving, and how will this help your work in the action deliverables of the actions and at your county and at your city?
Well, thank you, Yunus. I really appreciate the question. And I want to say that collaboration has been a way of life for me, my personal life, my business life, my public life. And joining the board of ICLEI USA helped me to kind of categorize it and name it so that we could actually be an example for other communities when we talk about multi-level. Because when you work in a community at the micro level, you do what works, and what works is collaboration. And so, to start talking about multi-level, and I'm starting to think about how in my community, for instance, we have 4 community associations. I work with the community associations, I work with my colleagues on the county council, and our county, we don't have any cities in our county, so our county is the council for our Tri-Isle area, which is Maui, Molokai, and Lanai. And we also work collaboratively with the other 3 counties in our state. So I'm vice president of the Hawaii State Association of Counties, which is where we share ideas, we share our proposed legislation with each other, we share successes that we've had, and we're able to kind of spread it around the state. And working with the state level has been really interesting because the state has in many ways followed the counties. And Maui County came out early in 2019, this is early for us, declaring a climate emergency. Our state followed in just this year, earlier this year, declared a climate emergency and became the first state in the United States to declare the climate emergency. So Maui is in many ways leading the state. We've just passed a large homes requirement for any large homes, 5,000 square feet and more, have to be built to net zero standards, and the state will be adding to that. The state has been testifying at the hearings in my committee, which is the Climate Action, Resilience, and Environment Committee, on the bills that we've been passing because they support it and they also want to take it to the state level. So beyond that, I've been working with the federal government as a member of the Local Government Advisory Committee for the EPA. And I have to tell you that it's thrilling to have reenacted these local government advisory committees because they were very inactive for the last 4 years. And I don't have to tell you why, but we've gotten into this this mode with the current administration where they not only appreciate the local governments, but they need us. They need us to help them decide how to move forward with action, what they're requiring us to do at the local level. But they've also said that this is the most diverse group that they've ever had on the Local Government Advisory Committee for the EPA. So the appreciation for the diversity and the gender balance and the demographics and different income levels, different levels of community has been really encouraging for those of us who are serving on that committee because we feel like we're being heard. Every level of administrator in the EPA has come out to talk to us, virtually, of course, and listened and encouraged us to respond. And then to hear that when President Biden came to, I'm also a member of the National Association of County Organizations, and Biden has come out a couple of times, and of course all of his administration directors have come out to speak to us and hit home the the mandate that they need counties to take the lead. They need counties and cities to take the lead because we are the boots on the ground. They can pass policies, but we need to enact them and enforce them. And so the announcement we just heard about the infrastructure bill was, we have a lot of mandates that are unfunded.
Yeah.
And that is going to be incredible to have that funding coming in. We actually had a meeting with Gina McCarthy, the White House climate advisor, who asked us, how can we get the money to the people who are going to use it? Because there's a recognition that there are some red states that are giving the money back, that for some reason don't want anything to do with the money they're getting from the administration. So it's really going to be incumbent upon cities and counties to be demanding this money come in, because if we don't get it, it's to the detriment of our constituents.
I think this point you made is that is very important, and someone can ask us, why are you discussing these issues in a climate COP? But I think it's exactly the reason. So this transformative action that is needed, obviously ministers of environment, as you said, as policymakers, are not the ones who will directly reach to the citizens, and therefore they need local and regional governments at all sizes, and especially to make sure these ideas are immediately rolled out. And I think that is why it is really is a service, as you said, that they need you as councillors, so that we do not wait for too long, and we can immediately disperse technologies, policies, so that when they come back in a year round, they can proudly, the national governments can say that, look, I have made more improvements in my mitigation, adaptation, or other services because I work with them, and that's I think the reason why we are talking these discussions here at the COP, so that everybody can be learning this experience and then reflect to their capacities. So,
and I also want to say that it's important for our constituents to come out and say, look what we did in our community, in our county, and put that out there to the other parts of the United States that aren't getting that money because maybe their governors are giving the money back. So, it really starts at the grassroots level and spreads from there.
So we now heard from 3 different continents, 3 different countries, 3 different political leaders in their own capacities. Now I'd like to return back to Maria, because she's not representing obviously a local and regional government, but she's one of the closest partners as a research body. And this information, as Ronan mentioned, every day they have to make decisions, and how to make their decisions based on data, based on evidence, based on science, so that when they go back to their councils or when they go back to their communities, they say that, look, it was the correct decision because I listened to the science. So now we are seeing more and more these institutions serving to the local and regional governments, either through their own funding or through their own initiatives or through multiple partnerships. Maybe you can tell us, Maria, what is the reason why it is so important for local and regional based research centers to support the local and regional governments in their work?
Well, first of all, we are not a local center. I mean, we are working on multilateral support policy. We are working on national support policy, and we are based on a local government. And that gives us the opportunity to have an overview, because so far, the adaptation talks in the convention are being focused on national adaptation plans for so many years, right? So the idea was, okay, it's difficult to think about globally in terms of adaptation, which is a new thing from the Paris Agreement now. But it's also very difficult to think locally because it's so granular, so different, depends on the context, right? So we were focusing on the national for many, many years, and the science was also focusing on the national. And I mean, on the mitigation side, we were thinking globally because it was easier to think in a global goal, and it was more difficult to go to national and even more difficult to go to local, right? So in a way, adaptation and mitigation were crossing across the board without really talking to each other. Today, what we know, the scientific community knows, is that we cannot talk about adaptation or mitigation. We have to talk at the multilateral, at the national, and at the local level particularly. We have to talk about adaptation and mitigation as 2 sides of the same coin. Because if we don't take into account the vulnerability at the local level, we can design mitigation options that will fail, and we don't have time to fail. So science, and we in particular, we are trying first at the global level to understand what it means an adaptation global goal in a way that will not prejudge to cascade down to national and local through the adaptation national plans, but at the same time learn from the local level lessons in order to well implement or better implement the national plans, make them as enabling environments for that local adaptation, rather to long list of measures that later on are very difficult to be translated into the local. And for the global level, what we think is is important today is basically to make sure that the global framework doesn't constrain the necessary flexibility to implement at the national and local level in a way that they become synergistic. And that's not an easy task even for the scientific community. And the other day I was reflecting, because we are talking about mainstreaming adaptation and climate change into other global agendas. But we're not talking about mainstreaming adaptation and mitigation into the local agendas. So I think it's very important, because at the local level, the local communities and the cities, the small cities, they don't really separate the agendas. They make decisions in a very integrated manner, because otherwise it's a burden for them. It's a burden to have monitoring for adaptation, monitoring for mitigation, so they need to really mainstream into the decision making. And what as the scientific community also needs is to provide tools to allow them to do this integration and this mainstreaming. And now, as you know, we are also having a huge amount of data. Satellites, big data, and for a small city, for a small community, it's extremely difficult to digest this information. So I think also the scientific community has to sort of accompany those communities, those local entities, small cities, to digest this data, to produce adapted tools to their needs, and try to avoid simplification, standardization, with the overall objective of mainstreaming everything into the decision making. And it's quite interesting, because on adaptation, some years ago, a decade ago, right, the cities, for example, were able to absorb the adaptation, the climate change impacts. But as it was said by our colleague today, the impacts are becoming stream. So the cities and the local communities, they cannot absorb anymore. So we have a very big financial gap now. A financial gap that is very likely that even national governments will not be able to absorb. So another area where we are starting to think is how we can engage private sector into financing adaptation, but a private sector that is used to work with risk, for example, insurance. Right? So we need to really make a revolution on certain private sector in order to engage them with their own knowledge and business and disclose information. I mean, the insurance sector has more information than anyone else on risk, for example. So to share this information with the cities and the local entities, it will really make a difference for them. Because they don't have this capacity to really gather the data, analyze the data, and so on. So I think that those are the things we're working usually with. But we try to be in all the scales to understand.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, as we have discussed now, in the scientific community now, we are also very, very advantaged, because we have the IPCC just adopted an action plan for cities and climate change, which will also be one of the first synthesis report that will be adopted in the 7th assessment report. So the more data is available at the local level and it relates to the national ones, the IPCC can also make much more granular, as you mentioned, specific and that right guidance, so that is localized but also reflecting to the global balance.
Let me to disagree.
Okay.
Can I disagree?
Please.
I think IPCC made their task already. They raise awareness. They just raise awareness at the global level, but they don't have the capacity to go down to these granular scales. And the risk is that if we try to standardize guidance, we will likely to fail in many territories. Okay. You really need to make sure that all this feedback from the bottom up, it really fits this knowledge
I see your point.
management body we need.
But I think still the research agenda is one of the reasons why we are discussing with the IPCC, so that there is a better understanding.
Of course. I mean, I think with IPCC, for example, one thing I think is fundamental is that they will understand that when they are developing the scenarios for mitigation, some of the scenarios they are developing and the portfolios and the narratives, unless they take into account adaptation, and unless they take into account the vulnerability, which is very granular, their portfolios won't work. It will not work in the real world.
Perfect. We'll get back to another round, of course. Now I want to turn back to my colleague Jean-Baptiste. Obviously, we have seen politicians, especially local and regional politicians, who are primarily mandated to serve their constituencies. So these global agendas, global processes is, of course, a huge, complex, even looking at the list of topics being discussed, the list of abbreviations, for even a normal expert, it's hard to follow, and for a local politician or regional politician, it's even harder. But that's the reason why they are connected to this process through their networks, local and regional networks, national networks. And of course, we are not discussing climate change in an isolated world. As Maria mentioned, at the local level, while everything is also converging, at the global level, we are in the United Nations space. United Nations is also going through important dynamics. There are different discussions on multilateralism. From SDGs, we are going towards to the 75th anniversary of UN. So how do you see, as the Global Task Force Secretariat on behalf of UCLG, the climate space and this global other arenas, how they are helping each other, and how we can make sure there's a more synergetic approach that can be developed?
Yeah, no, thank you, Yunus, and much appreciated. Well, as you were saying, we, as UCLG, United Cities and Local Governments, we play this role of facilitating the Global Task Force. The Global Task Force, I mean, it's probably not a very well-known mechanism, but it's a very powerful one. It gathers 27 networks, generalistic or specialized, continental or global, to unite forces of the local and regional governments to the UN. And it's similar to what we're observing with COP. We are making progress, but very little progress if you look at the long term. One very recent example, and I'm connecting already the general multilateral system advocacy with the climate one, is the global report we produced to UN 75. The UN celebrated the 75th anniversary, and we produced a report based on the knowledge of the networks to push for greater recognition and acknowledgement of cities and regions to the UN. In there was a basic argument. There were many arguments, but one of the basic ones is that we are state actors. We are governments. Governments that are elected democratically. And this gives us, we are public authority. And that gives us weight in the debates. We are making progress because following this report that is connected has been created the UN Task Force for the Future of Cities, which gathers UN agencies, but that are making concrete proposals on the table to increase the acknowledgement, to enhance our presence to the UN. And they are looking at different options there. But one message there, and that's my first one, is collectively, when we unite, when we gather together information, when we produce together advocacy, we are stronger to the UN. We are seeing the risks here at COP of a non-inclusive networked multilateralism. That means that there are more people in the streets than in the rooms accepted. And this is getting stronger at every COP, I have the feeling. At every COP, this is much bigger. So that's our message, and this is connected to the incredible advocacy role that you are playing as ICLEI as focal point to UNFCCC, but that we are doing to other different global agendas, is having that seat at the global table, whether this is the SDG, whether this is the Sendai framework, whether this is the financing Addis Ababa action agenda, or whether this is the new urban agenda. So we are making those things. That's the first thing. Then second, I think in this debate is not only the notion of the governance of the UN, of the system, but the governance within each process at the national level. And in there, obviously, that push that we are all making for more ambitious NDCs, but not only about the number or the what, but the how. How our national governments are going to include local and regional governments and their associations into reaching those NDCs and those higher NDCs. So that's another underlying argument. And then we want to keep the three pillars: governance, financing, and capacity building. And this is where we are not only a network, we are a network of networks. We play that role of connecting the initiatives, so Race to Zero, Race to Resilience, that actually complement themselves and not supplement. And then in that frame, well, we can tackle this in the second part, but we work with we advocate, we learn, we research, and we network. So that is the strategy as a network, a network of networks to build that voice stronger to the UN.
And especially, I think it's important to let the negotiators in these rooms, which are traditionally, let's say, represent from ministers of environment, not necessarily always following the agenda in New York, or we don't know, for example, how many of them are aware of this, the task force. For example, UN Secretary General, based on the result of these works, have now started to propose that a new body of advisory board for local and regional governments should be created under the UN Secretary General's authority. Then it is even more important to the UNFCCC process to say that time for multi-level action has come, so that you benefit from this progress. For example, we will discuss about biodiversity agenda. We have the second phase of a 10-year action plan, so that in the climate space, they could also be more ambitious to develop new ideas to engage with local and regional governments, to be benefiting from the other processes and reflect into the climate space. Therefore, it's very important that we feed the negotiators here in the COPs, in the climate COPs, about other processes. I think that's one of the reasons why we're all here. We have completed our first round. I'm looking at our colleagues from the technical teams. As far as I know, there is no question yet from the audience. If not, then I will see an alert from you, but then we can continue with the second round. Maybe in this last half an hour, let's try to also be a bit more go into the specifics, as it was discussed, a bit how. So we have now tried to discuss about why we should be involved, and maybe let's give some specific example. Especially, I would turn on our leaders from different jurisdictions and different capacities to give some concrete examples about their action, and maybe with Jalisco, especially the regional governments, the urban-rural connection, the landscape planning, the biodiversity, the food discussions. How are you making these kind of your responsibilities also with the cities and strengthen the climate perspective, be it mitigation, be it adaptation? Maybe you can give some example from Jalisco along these lines.
Of course. Well, first, the state have developed or start to compromises in Race to Zero. We are the first state in Mexico that put the compromise to Race to Zero, and now several states are doing the same. And the state developed climatic strategy and a state climate plan. And we are working with our decarbonization pathway and our carbon budget. But we need to do that in other levels. And in this way, the intermunicipal agencies has emblematic projects, but in action plan, they develop the regional climate action programs in each region, 11 regional action programs, and the metropolitan area have this metropolitan climate action plan in the city. That is very important for us because there are the 62% of the population of the state. And most of them, principally in rural areas, work on the forest management agenda with focus on forest fire management and a strategy for reduction of degradation and deforestation, for which we have developed a strategy for reducing deforestation with targets of 50% reduction by 2024 and 90% to 2030 in the state. Besides, we believe that global goals and the national determinative contribution, like you say, aren't reachable for the national governments alone. Even difficult to reach them with the subnational government collaboration. And for this, we must involve the people, the businesses, the university, the civil society, the organization, because this is not only a multi-level agenda, but it's a multi-stakeholder problem, and we must approach together. In Jalisco, working with productive sector, specifically in one thing, is with the productive sector is key, since the three main deforestation drivers are the avocado plantation, the agave crops for tequila, and the livestock production for meal. In order to solve this problem in the tequila sector, we signed an agreement with the Tequila Regulatory Council and the tequila industry, the last COP in Madrid, and now we have a result, a protocol, and a certification that ensure that the tequila with the agave responsable ambiental, is a responsible environmental agave, trading mark has not caused deforestation. That means, I'm glad that today that we have the first batch of tequila, Don Julio, with this certificate now. And this is a very important aspect to participate with the private sector, because if we work with the market aspect, with the industry, with the private sector to create new mechanisms to self-control, for example, with the origin denomination of tequila that permit to have a traceability of the product to arrive to the industry, is possible to assure that in the conformity of the origin denomination, you have a pass, or how do you say, a step, a step that you have to be in a non-forest area to register your plantation to produce tequila. And in this way, we expect that in 2026, we will have all the production of tequila free deforestation in the country. In 2026.
2026.
Because our date of initial date to measure is 2016, and if a plantation was registered between 2016 to 2020, that could be continue to produce tequila. But in 2020, if you registered you can register a tequila plantation if it's coming from an area that was deforested before 2016. And that will cut the incentive when the price of tequila or the demand of tequila grows, the growers of agave plant in marginal areas to have a profit in this economic question. And I think it's very important to do that. And with this, only this measure, we will reduce more or less 30% of deforestation in the state. Also, we are currently designing the protocol for the livestock traceability, and it is a non-deforestation certification. For this, we count with the support of several international partners, such as Governors for Climate and Forest Task Force, the United Kingdom government, and the Climate and Land Use Association. In this way, with the technical capacity in the field, where it's possible to do the transversal action between environment agenda and rural development agenda and productive agenda with the Ministry of Agriculture. That's one of the most important difficult to do to stop deforestation. And now we are working with this intermunicipal association to give support to producers with ejidos and communities to change their production system to agroforestry and agro-silvopastoral systems to, with an agreement to stop deforestation in this activity.
And I think one of the good news is that on the first day of COP, the Multilevel Action Pavilion, which was hosted by Scotland, was opened with a panel on net zero whiskey. So the whiskey industry in Scotland is also now committed for emission reductions, but also sustainable production, better relation with the community, waste management and resource supply chain. So an example from Mexico, Jalisco, an example from Scotland, in fact, are giving the same example that the discussions being discussed here, the business community is trying to talk to the national governments and try to make change, but in fact, at the local level, with proactive thinking, it's already happening. So that this is the reason why we're bringing these conclusions or results to the COP, so that they can be much more confident to replicate such experiences globally.
And you know, for the tequila, for example, the origin denomination is include 4 states. And now we're working with the 4 states to assure that all the origin denomination will do that. We signed with the Guanajuato, and we are working with them with the same protocol, and we arrived together to 100 of the tequila production will be in this way, and they have an agreement with us to assure the water responsible management and waste management and carbon
reductions
engagement in the production. But that I think is very important to assure a collaboration with other states. And now we have in Mexico a Mexican climatic community that are involved, the 32 states of the country, that we are working in an agenda of development capacities, institutional capacity, to have a climatic, a well-designed climatic agenda to achieve to these, the goals that we have established now here.
Excellent, excellent. Maybe Ronan, how would you like to discuss the proactive approach of local governments on, once again, combining economic, social, and environmental issues through local green deals, and that they also connect the financial constraints, but also introduce this relation with this, also their community engagement, especially with the youth. What we have seen in a number of European, let's say, cities, that's also during this 2 years of Fridays for Future, they have mobilized a lot their councils to commit for climate emergency. So I think being a town hall, having the presence of a town hall in the middle of a city gives the power to the citizens that they can influence politics, and that's why it's very important local governments open their doors both for business but also citizens, the urban poor, the informal settlements, so that they always feel that there's someone who could hear their concerns, and then they can be receiving the right incentives and right capacities. No. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, but if you want some concrete example, I don't know if I have one example for all your mobilization of everybody together, but maybe it's 3 examples who show that. First example, during the COVID crisis, the development of cycling line in the city of Europe was absolutely spectacular. 1,000 and 1,000 kilometers in few months. And it's very concrete for inhabitants of the city. Yesterday, cars, today, bicycle. And the public space changed very, very fast with this kind of decision, and it is decision of local government. I think during the crisis, this development of the CCRE line, maybe it's the symbol of the capacity to move very fast at the local level. It's a first example. Second example, more business. It is, and we see that in the last report of climate change, and we analyze the strategy of cities and territories everywhere in the world, with some example of ICLEI, of course. The strategy for energy, it is very, very interesting to see how a city can want to use just renewable energy with contract long term with some companies, with local community, with inhabitants. A lot of new tools to have this capacity to manage the consumption of energy, and first to develop renewable energy. This point is very, very interesting at this moment. For example, Melbourne today as a contract long term for renewable electricity, and we have a lot of examples in Europe. This point is very, very interesting too. Maybe a difficulty, and it is very important for inhabitants, it is we have not the tools, and it is a discussion with the European Union, of course, for the retrofit of the whole building. We need a lot of money. It's money for people who have not the capacity to access to loan. We need some investor. It's very complex. At this moment, we have not this, I think, the good financial tools for that, or it's key if we want to decrease our consumption of energy in Europe. We must continue to discuss, to invent new tools for this point. And to finish, another point, it is, I think, and I see that as a councillor of the city of Nantes, a metropole with on a very important growth the last decade. I think that we understand now, mayor of big cities understand that we must change our paradigm for development, and to create a new balance between big cities, middle towns, rural area, to have a strategy, to have a balance, not just for the building for the inhabitants, but for the job too. And we have seen the last decade, but it's the same thing everywhere in the world, that the big city capped all the jobs, and we need now to have a strategy to have more jobs in the small city, for example, and to decrease mobility. We need that in link with the absolutely necessity to save rural agricultural land and natural land, but it's not so easy. It's not so easy because the makers, the responsible of company prefer the big cities. Yeah. They prefer the big cities. And how we discuss to create this new balance, it's key. For me, for the next 20, 30 years in Europe, to create this new balance, this new aménagement du territoire in French, will be absolutely key.
Yeah. Well, of course, I mean, the reasons why cities were getting crowded was also related to the, as you said, job availability of factories, employment opportunities. But nowadays, technology, with especially the digital technology, the way people can generate income can be decentralized, and also what is rural, what is urban is also confusing, with urban ecology being expanded and many rural communities being part of the life. I think we really have to rethink about the way we are designing our cities, and that is, I think, one of the new challenges of this coming decade. So that's maybe COVID, that could be an opportunity in that sense, to give us the chance to sit back a bit, to think about, and then restart, and then that's building back better, and then all the efforts and redesign that Japans are saying. So definitely it shall be a new way of living in all senses. Maybe we can come back to Kelly. Kelly King, especially also, we have discussed about Race to Zero, which is, let's remember for those who are not aware of it, it's a motivation, it's a process which the local and regional governments are encouraged to adopt ambitious 2030 targets in order to reach their 2050 neutrality goals. And in that sense, as a council member, the work you are doing with ICLEI-US in terms of the technical data and then transforming into policy making, then to convince your both administration staff but also council members, maybe you can refer to us, because in the US we are around 100, close to 100 cities who are committing to Race to Zero through this kind of technical data and capacity building tools.
Well, and of course, thank you for that question. Of course, you know, for our state committed to 100% renewables in our utility grid by 2045, back in 2015 when our current governor first got elected. So that set the standard for the entire state. And there were people pushing back against that goal. But, you know, we know that you're not going to get there if you don't know where you're going. And so it's very important to have those goals in state statute, and it has given us a focus at the county level. I talked about our some of our initiatives with the large homes and net zero, and we're moving forward with looking at our first defenses. Our first defense against flooding is wetlands. Those have been shrinking, so you know we're passing a wetland overlay policy where we're going to try to protect and restore some of the wetlands that we've lost. Our first defense against erosion is the coral reef. And what's killing the coral, a large part of what's killing the coral reef is all the chemical sunscreens that tourists use when they come to our island, and there are barrels, 55-gallon barrels a day going into our ocean. So causing coral bleaching, causing the death of marine life. And so I've just passed out of my committee the strongest, most stringent chemical sunscreen ban in the world, and we're banning all chemical sunscreens. The only two that are going to be allowed are the 2 mineral ones. So we're taking those kinds of initiatives, but we also have a cultural overlay, because everything kind of goes back to our host culture, and we have to look at how we're not going to leave anybody behind, and we're going to have equity and a just transition. Our host culture is one of the most important pieces of our island life. And so where ICLEI comes in is helping us focus on the circular economy as a recovery. That is really huge. We're one of the 4 pilot projects in the U.S., Maui County is, to develop that model. And of course, our state had already started looking at it, and it came from the indigenous culture. It came from the Hawaiians starting to look at this circular economy. So ICLEI was so timely getting into that. And really, when we start looking at our economy, and we look at certain measures like EVs and windmills, those aren't part of a circular economy. Those are other multinational corporations coming in and setting up windmills and setting up EV stations. Agriculture is really going to be key to that economy, because that's local farming. And if we focus on regenerative agriculture, now we're doing carbon sequestration, we're addressing climate change on top of addressing local farming. We did a major move a couple of years ago, and we started putting out millions of dollars of micro grants to local farmers. We started with $2.5 million that we put out the first year for up to $25,000 grants for local farmers, helping that. Sometimes they just say, all I need is a $5,000 piece of equipment and I can double my taro production. And taro is a staple of Hawaii, as you know. So focusing on what local people need, we are also trying to integrate the issues of pesticides and herbicides, because right now we've passed a bill to eliminate that from all county facilities. So parks and county, gardens around the county buildings cannot use herbicides or pesticides. But dealing with agriculture is another thing, because you don't want to shut down agriculture, and there are people who are farming traditionally, and people who really want to farm organically. And so we have to also look at the issues of pesticide drift. Because we have the trade winds, and so if you're downwind from someone who is using pesticides, you're going to be using pesticides, unwittingly. So those are some of the issues, and that's one of the things I'm really so thrilled about ICLEI, because they will come into your community, they will help you develop baseline data. And I know earlier you talked about food. Every politician starts out their campaign by saying 85% of our food is imported. And we need to do something about that. But somehow they don't have the ideas of what to do about that. And also, we aren't looking at, we're going to do, I'm on the Maui Nui Food Alliance also, and we're going to do a baseline data study to really figure out how much food is imported, because when they say those numbers, they're looking at the food on the grocery store shelves. They're not looking at the 70,000 head of axis deer that are running around our county that people are eating, because there's a lot of subsistence hunting. The feral cows, the feral pigs, the goats, the chickens, all of the backyard gardens, all of the small farms are not being calculated. And when you look at what happened in Cuba, you know that that's going to be part of the equation if something happens to our ports. So we're being very holistic about this, and we need a lot of baseline data so we could get to that plan that we need.
I think that is probably the beauty of the Paris Agreement, in the sense that 1.5 degree goal is really cannot be just a technological solution. I mean, that was an era, we are talking about 26th COP, which means that over the past 30 years we have been discussing this. There was an era of, let's say, engineer-focused end-of-pipe technologies, or just switching from one technology to the other. Then a second generation came, which tradable commodities like a stock exchange, all these credits were sold in bulk. But starting from Paris Agreement with the 1.5, we are discussing about this kind of holistic approach. One of the proposals for LGMA, for example, this non-market mechanisms, being circularity, being holistic, sustainable urban development as a mechanism for climate action. And that is exactly the type of things that we have to introduce new ideas, because 1.5 degree living is completely different than what we are used to be experiencing. So therefore, we have to bring everything on board. Maybe again on that, along these lines, maybe you can give us a couple of examples about how Basque Center is now providing recommendations in terms of this 1.5 degree style research or capacity building?
Well, first of all, it's not about 1.5. It's about how to combine system approach, sectoral approach, and social transformations to be embedded into what we want to do. As you said, 10 years ago, we were thinking technology is the solution. Later on, we passed to technology plus finance. And now we figured out that there is no technology plus finance alone. So we really need social movements, social transformations. And we need to have and combine at the proper scales system approaches, for example, for food systems, sector approaches. For example, you want to decarbonize stainless steel because in your region, this is the main priority for decarbonization. But also you need to make sure that when you design those options for your particular context, you don't, for example, produce distributional effects that may affect more to low-income households than high-income households, because it may be, technically speaking, very effective, but it will never get traction, right? So I think the point now is, because we have to go to 1.5 and we cannot lose time, we really need to be very creative on combining the right things at the right level in the right context. That's what the scientific community, after many years, figured out, right? Which probably the communities figured out so many years ago already themselves, you know? So I think that's important. I mean, we have now circular economy, you know, so you go more a system approach. It was very interesting to hear Jalisco, because at the very end, the solutions they're putting in place are very much related to a very well-known and old discussion, for example, deforestation. But now they figured out that it's not only about reducing emissions, it's also about more resiliency, it's also about protecting soil, it's also about protecting biodiversity. And that's one of the things that we also learned from the pandemic, right? I mean, when we got all isolated, we figured out that maybe there's no food coming from our ports, right? So we need to relocalize production. So we need to rethink how we are doing globalization. It's been done. So I think at the very end, climate change is becoming just one more thing, right? Not just the thing, but the one more thing you have to take into account. And I think that's very good.
Maybe then, actually, that connects very well to Jean-Baptiste, because a couple of months ago, there was an important summit, which is the fourth Culture Summit, and UCLG has been advocating that the fourth pillar of sustainability is the cultural aspect. So I think with this 1.5, there is no better possibility to discuss culture, because a new mindset, a new way of living, a new way of approaching our relation with our nature, society is needed. And I think this new thinking is to be connected to the policies and activities. So maybe you can continue along these social values, along with in the culture community, Climate Heritage Network and UCLG also produced in a number of new information. So maybe you can conclude, because we are getting to the end of our discussion. I would like to give your final words so that then you can make this kind of references in our future work.
No, yeah, thank you, Yunus, and it's a very insightful discussion, because we're making the connections there, and you see how the networks work together, but also build on the knowledge of science, of their communities, of the diversity of local and regional governments, but united in the same values, principles, and objectives. There's one word that I wanted to use here is the word that we're using. We've been going a lot from local to global, but our job is also a lot to go from global to local, so that communities and local and regional authorities understand better and can actually implement the global agendas. It's localizing. And localizing is not transposing global objectives to the local. It's creating these enabling environments that we've just been discussing. It means it's creating it with the international community, with the development banks, etc. And in there, there are several interesting paths that we've been working on, but it's raising awareness, and then it's inspiring also. It's see how the global agendas have also inspired action at the local level, and it's implementing, and then it's monitoring. How do you monitor progress at the local level? So we've been as a network working on those core components that link with advocacy, learning, and research. I would just echo what has been said on this need to go only beyond mitigation, adaptation, attenuation. I mean, a lot what is coming also from our members is just what you said here today, is the transformation of the model. Is the transformation not only of the governance model that is needed, but out of the development model, consumption, production, and relations to nature. Let also link with the COP15 in Kunming. So that is more or less as the view from the global networks. But yeah, we'll keep pushing.
Excellent, excellent. In fact, let's remember we had cities with thousands of history. So we have a culture of challenging those crises and living in harmony with nature. For the last couple of hundreds of years, with our dependence on fossil fuels, our production and consumption methodologies, which was much more extractive, linear, has really resulted all these waste and also emissions. So we are now reinventing our circular culture, as Mayor of Izmir has mentioned, that living in harmony with nature, living in harmony with our past, living in harmony with our nations and communities, and being able to change, that life is not static, that let's be able to embrace new ways of working and new ways of living, so that we can leave behind. So there are some of the things have to be left behind, like our addiction to fossil fuel, like addiction to our consumption, so that these are giving us the chance to open new visions and new models of work, so that we can reach to those goals that we have committed for in the climate, biodiversity, and sustainable agendas.
Don't you think that what is happening is that there is a reflection about what welfare we want, at all levels, from the citizen to the very high level?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a very interesting momentum now, right? Yeah. And the pandemic, in essence, also pushed for this momentum to be even more strong. Exactly.
I mean, the discussion is now coming up. There was a big debate to get rid of GDP, the value of well-being, the value of health, the value of the livelihoods becoming more and more an agenda that we tend to forget in the past, but now it's back in our agenda, and that should be our goal, not to make more focus on this quantifiable issues, but rather also in spiritual and in inspirational values, so that we offer a better living for our citizens and our generations. So We are about to wrap up. I would suggest we do not offer the floor another round. I may have been better managing this discussion, but it was really nice to have. I didn't want to cut all of you. First of all, I'd like to thank you all. Let's recall for our audience once again, today's discussion was with Ronan Dantec from Nantes, Sergio Graf from Jalisco, Kelly King from Maui County, Mario Sanz from Basque Center, and Jean-Baptiste from United Cities and Local Governments. And I am the Director of Global Advocacy at ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. We thank you very much. We hope this discussion can also inspire negotiators and partners in Glasgow, so that when we leave Glasgow, we can say that it was worthwhile to come here and that we can leave a nice legacy. And we'd like to thank all the technical partners behind the doors, behind the screens to help us, and the Secretariat to offer this venue and space for us. With that, I'd like to wish you all a nice night, evening, morning, wherever you are. And thanks a lot for your very nice dialogue and participation as partners as well.
Thank you. Thank you.